Waiver Wire Week 9. Week 9 is here. We're back at it. We're talking about the Waiver Wire. Last week we had the craziness where I had to record this like super late in the day with all the updates. Today's a little easier. And this week's Waiver Wire, newsflash, not that good. This is not that good a Waiver Wire. When I was writing the article, we had multiple times where the last few weeks we were like really hyped for the Waiver Wire. Running backs, wide receivers. This week, not a whole lot. If you need a running back, this week is kind of a mess. But we got to start out at the top. We got to start talking about the bye weeks. The bye weeks coming up, these are going to start getting hot and heavy. Like we talked about being a week ahead earlier in the season. Then week 8, we had no bye weeks. This week, you get the Pittsburgh Steelers and you get the San Francisco 49ers on a bye week. Then in week 10, it gets even choppier. Week 10, you get the Browns, the Packers, the Raiders, the Seahawks, the Cardinals, Panthers, Giants, and Bucks in week 11. So we'll go through that one more time. Week 9, Pittsburgh and San Francisco. If you are using George Pickens, if you are using Najee Harris, be prepared. 49ers, this is an interesting one because we could get Christian McCaffrey back. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Week 10, the Browns, the Packers, the Raiders, the Seahawks. A lot of fantasy-friendly guys in those teams. Week 11, Arizona, Carolina, the Giants, the Buccaneers. So it's going to be coming up pretty much every single week now. We're going to be dealing with buys. This is going to be a tough stretch. This is why you need to have that depth. This is why you need to be careful with the guys you add on your roster. And this is why some of those contingent upside guys come into play. Guys get banged up, next man in. We talked about it last week with Jalen McMillan, Ricky Pearsall. A lot of those guys were on the field a ton. McMillan, we wanted to see a little more scoring, but he led Tampa Bay wide receivers in snaps. There's some promise there with McMillan. Ricky Pearsall, pretty promising. We're going to talk about him a little bit later as well. So let's get it started. This Waiver Wire show, we're specifically talking about players that are not widely available. There's plenty of Waiver Wire material out there that's going to go tell you to go pick up Josh Downs. You were picking up Josh Downs on this show in week 1. We were stashing him. This show, we're specifically looking at players who are available in 70% or more of leagues. And I'm going to talk about a couple players who are shallow league ads. Those ones are going to be available in like 60% of leagues. So we're looking to find you the edge if you're in a competitive league, if you're in a deep league, if you're in a league where there's never anything on the waiver wire, we're going to try to find players for you to add off the waiver wire every single week right here on Waiver Wired. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. If there's a couple shallow league ads, Matt Stafford available in 61% of leagues. Stafford and the Rams are back. Passed for 3 touchdown passes in Thursday's win over Minnesota. He would be in my top 10 additions if he was eligible for that. And stick around to the end of the show. I always reveal my top 10 overall. Hunter Henry. Henry's had at least 5 targets for 3 straight weeks. So in a Drake May-led offense, Hunter Henry is basically like a borderline tight end 1 rest of the way. He's very, very solid addition for you, especially if you need a tight end. Running back, Tyler Allgeier. Tyler Allgeier is available to you in 63% of leagues. He had 12 carries for 33 yards this past week, which is nothing, but it was 12 carries. No work in the passing game. Bijan has sort of taken over in that, but the value for Allgeier is if Bijan were to miss time, Allgeier would be an RB1. And I had some people pushing back on that, being like, Theo, how would he be an RB1? Because there's not a real threat when it comes to the RB3 in Atlanta. So this is like the volume you see for Bijan and the volume you see for Allgeier. Allgeier would absorb like 80% of that total volume. He would be a very high touch running back if Bijan were to miss time. And this could be Bijan missing 2 weeks. It doesn't always have to be some catastrophic end of season injury where these guys pay off. If you had Allgeier in your lineup for 2 weeks on his own, that could be 2 wins for you and 2 like 18-point performances, 15 to 20-point performances. That's how highly I feel about this Atlanta offense right now. They're in a great place. Braelon Allen, the offense is not in a great place, but the same argument. If Breece Hall were to go down, Braelon Allen would be that guy. He'd be a top 12 to 15 running back. This is a player who is also, Aaron Rodgers has shown he's willing to dump the ball off to. So Braelon Allen wouldn't have that insane Breece Hall 50 to 90 receiving yard type potential, but I do think he'd give you like 30 receiving yards and like 3 catches, something like that if Breece Hall were to miss time. So Braelon Allen, massive contingent upside if he's available in your league. And he's available in 63% of leagues. Ricky Pearsall, keep an eye on this one because a lot of people don't prepare for the bye weeks. So we want to keep attention to the players that are cut. So Ricky Pearsall is available in 63% of leagues, but a guy like this where he had a 39-yard run, where he played like basically the whole game for 2 straight games since he's come back, like in theory, this guy would be a guy that's being added this week, but it's very much league specific because in some leagues, people start panicking bye weeks. I don't want to hold this guy. I'm worried all these bye weeks coming up in week 10, all these bye weeks coming up in week 11. I got to cut it loose. So keep an eye on Ricky. Pick him up if he was cut. So of those shallow league ads, I would say that Stafford, Allgeier, Braelon Allen, and Ricky Pearsall would all be top 10 additions, and Hunter Henry would be a borderline one. So they all have value if they're available in your league. Let's stick to the quarterback position. And the quarterback position is really one of the most exciting positions this week on the waiver wire. We're talking about Bo Nix. Bo Nix makes my top 10 overall. He's going to be high up on it. He has been quarterback 3 overall from weeks 5 through weeks 8. So I think the early narrative on Bo Nix the first month of the season is completely gone out the window. Right now, the Denver Broncos are in the AFC playoffs. If the season ended today, they'd be like the 5 seed. They've been playing very well. They have an elite defense, and Bo Nix is really coming on. He set a career high with 3 passing touchdowns this past week against Carolina. And you're going to say, well, this was Carolina. But still, that's a huge step forward for him. And he's got the rushing production. Let's talk about, so Bo Nix is obviously a no-brainer sort of addition for you if he's available in your league. Sticking at the QB position, we got to talk about Russell Wilson because he's won 2 games in a row. Wilson was not nearly as good against the Giants as he was against the Jets, but he's still a locked-in starter. He's won the 2 games. So any thought that this is going to be like going away from him and going back to Justin Fields, like that ship has sailed. He's won 2 games in a row. Now they have the bye week to get better. Super flex starters, like rest of the year, Russell Wilson's right in your lineup for super flex. Drake Maye available in 85% of leagues, appeared to suffer a concussion and was knocked out of week 8's win over the Jets. But like before exiting, you saw everything you wanted to see about Drake Maye. He had a really long, nice touchdown run where it literally looked like a Josh Allen run. It was like everything you want to see for fantasy. We know that Drake Maye is willing to pass a ton. We know the game flow is usually pretty strong in New England's favor where they're going to be trailing. This game, he gets knocked out of the game, but still incredible promise. Drake Maye's back in our top 10 this week. Jameis Winston, welcome to the top 10. And Superflex managers, this is a must-add for you. Jameis Winston had a terrific debut. The Browns beat the Ravens. Winston passes for 3 touchdowns, and he had more passing yardage in any single game than Deshaun Watson did in his entire tenure as Cleveland Browns quarterback. So, like, Winston had 300-plus passing yards, 3 touchdown passes. They win the game. He's clicking with multiple players on the team. Like, David Njoku is locked in. If you have him, top 5, top 10 tight end rest of the way, like an elite tight end for you to have right now based on this offense ticking up. And we're going to talk about some of the wide receivers Jameis Winston's attached to because there's multiple ones in our top 10 this week. Daniel Jones, only a super flex starter and not a good one. He is hanging on by a thread. This was just a mixed bag. There's so much more you want out of Daniel Jones that you were getting earlier in the year, and you're just not right now. So we'll keep an eye on that situation, but he's still a super flex starter for most of you. So if somebody cuts him loose, go ahead, pick him up if you're in a super flex league. Pittsburgh defense is also awesome. So that's one to keep an eye on. And then a deep league ad, especially for super flex leagues, is Malik Willis. So Malik Willis started 2 games earlier in the year, and he rushed for 114 yards and a touchdown combined over those 2-week periods. So, like, Willis has that rushing upside, and the Packers use it. When Malik Willis is behind center, they obviously don't run a Jordan Love-like attack. They're going to call design runs for the quarterback position. They're going to become a little bit more running back centric with Willis behind center. This is a groin injury for Jordan Love. So again, if you're in a super flex format, Malik Willis becomes an interesting player. Like, would you start Malik Willis over Daniel Jones this week? I think I would. And I think a lot of you would as well. Expect a lot of like Jaden Reed design runs. Expect a ton of Josh Jacobs. And Green Bay is going to take the air out of the football a little bit. We've seen that with Malik Willis, they're willing to run the ball a ton. But Malik Willis's passing numbers were not like catastrophic. So this is one where Superflex managers, Malik Willis is an ad for you this week. And he's an interesting one. Like, this is an interesting streamer type. We're going to take a quick break. And we come back, we're going to talk about the running backs, the wide receivers, and the tight ends. This is Waiver Wired Week 9.
Hey, I know it's a popular statistic to cite, these underdog pick'ems, the vast majority of people go more than on any given player. Yeah, close to 80% of people, but that's because it's easier to find the shootouts than it is to find the dud games every Sunday afternoon. Like, we knew Week 5, Ravens-Bengals was going to be a shootout. And there goes Lamar Jackson for 4 touchdowns. There goes Joe Burrow for 5 touchdowns. Derrick Henry gets there. Zay Flowers is over 100 yards. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both got there, as well as Chase Brown. Both Chases got there. You go more than. You 100x your payout on Underdog with their Pick 6 contest. But then you look at Dolphins Patriots, that's going down the toilet, right? Too bad Ramondre Stevenson at 18 fantasy points. But you improve your chances at positive returns when you correlate with these Underdog pick'ems. Use promo code Underworld. This is the biggest bonus Underdog has ever given out, up to $125. Promo code is Underworld. Put in $250, you get $125. Now go start picking.
Waiver Wire Week 9. Already in Week 9. This is Waiver Wired. Make sure you are subscribing to the podcast version of the show. Make sure that you are checking out my article over at playerprofiler.com. And make sure you're checking out later in the week. I'm dropping a sleepers show and a sleepers article as well. That's been very well received. If you like the style of this Waiver Wire show, you're going to love that sleeper show as well. Let's go right into the running back position. Like, the running back position this week, if you need somebody this week, I got news for you. This is a tough one. Not a whole lot there for you. The top addition at running back is Isaac Guerendo. And Isaac Guerendo is one where we told you to add him weeks ago, and there was some pushback from people. Some people didn't like that one where we had him ranked. I was a little more aggressive than some people. But we saw it. The shoulder injury flared up with Jordan Mason. And we talked about it at the time, how shoulder injuries, toe injuries, these are ones where they can flare up again. So we want to be like, have the contingent upside of the back that's behind the injured running back. We saw it a few weeks back with Ray Davis when he got his opportunity, when James Cook was not playing. And we saw what happened when Isaac Guerendo stepped into the game when Jordan Mason's injury flared up. So Jordan Mason's injury flared up mid-game, and Guerendo steps in and finishes with 85 yards and his first rushing touchdown, and he had 3 catches. So, like, why is Guerendo not our number 1 addition? Because it sounds like Christian McCaffrey could be back after the bye. And I think the fact that Jordan Mason is banged up is going to speed up that process a little bit. San Francisco gets the win over Dallas, and San Francisco, like, goes in their bye week, and they need to go on a run for the rest of the season. This is not the start that they had in mind. Heading into the year, San Francisco was the Super Bowl favorite. I think coming out of the bye week, they could have a lot of momentum if McCaffrey's back in the lineup. That being said, McCaffrey hasn't played the whole year, and now Jordan Mason's banged up. So I still want to be aggressive getting Guerendo on my roster. He showed he can do it. This is an elite athlete, and he showed he can catch 3 passes in an NFL game. So this is one where add him, but he's not the number 1. And if I had the number 1 waiver wire priority this week in like a rolling list league, not a fab league, I'm not using it on Guerendo. But in a fab league, he is a strong back to add for depth on your roster. And even if McCaffrey's back this week, I still want to roster Guerendo, see what happens. Let's talk about other options. And really, I'm just kind of talking about handcuff running backs this week. That's all this is. There's not a single player I'm going to reveal to you right now that I would love to stick into my lineup in week 9. There just isn't. Ray Davis conceded everything to James Cook this past week, but he remains one of the top handcuff running backs in football. James Cook played fantastic, but Ray Davis, when Cook missed, had 150 plus yards in week 6, scored a touchdown in garbage time in week 7. He's available to you in 74% of leagues. Trey Benson, available to you in 84% of leagues. He would have significant value if James Conner were to miss time. he's completely invisible if James Conner plays. So this is like holding a 0 on your bench, hoping that he gets 2 or 3 starts for the end of the year. And that's really what a lot of these guys are going to be. Ty Chandler, he is actually conceding more touches to Aaron Jones since post-bye week for Minnesota. And we thought Aaron Jones was going to be banged up. Aaron Jones was dealing with a hip injury in that game over in England against the Jets. It's been anything but. Aaron Jones looks very strong. Ty Chandler is really conceding everything. Chandler is simply a handcuff. He's available to you in 76% of leagues. Blake Corum, still available to you in 85% of leagues. He makes my top 10 overall for the same reasons we talked about with Stafford. Matt Stafford is back in the mix. Puka Nacua is back. Cooper Kupp is back. Kyron Williams is balling. But if Kyron Williams were to miss time, Blake Corum would now step into the starting running back spot of a very, very good offense. Like when they're at full strength, the Rams are a very, very effective offense. Blake Corum needs to be treated that way. You feel better about the offensive situation for a guy like Blake Corum than you certainly would for a guy like Trey Benson or a guy like Ty Chandler or a couple of these other running backs we're going to talk about. So he goes into elite handcuff territory, and this week that's good enough for the top 10. Let's mention for 1 second that Zeke Elliott scored a touchdown this week. That's it. I don't want to talk about Zeke Elliott. He's available in 75% of the leagues. 75% of leagues if you want to add him. Justice Hill, available to you in 79% of leagues. He offers contingent value if Derrick Henry were to miss time. So if you roster Derrick Henry and Justice Hill is on the waiver wire, this is the time of year where if you haven't been rostering handcuffs, go ahead and do it. You know what you have with this Baltimore offense. You know what you have with Derrick Henry. And if Derrick Henry were to miss like 2 weeks, Justice Hill could help you out. Obviously wouldn't give you the same production or the same style. He's not a like-for-like replacement in the sense that like Ray Davis gives you a like-for-like. Trey Benson kind of gives you like-for-like with a little bit of Amari DiMercato. When it comes to Justice Hill, it would be like he'd catch a few extra passes. And that's the reason why Keaton Mitchell, who's available in 92% of leagues, is also an interesting player for you to stash, especially if you have an injured reserve. And Mitchell would be in the conversation for a lot more work if Derrick Henry were to go down. So Keaton Mitchell, one to keep an eye on. Roschon Johnson, available to you in 86% of leagues. DeAndre Swift playing fantastic. DeAndre Swift is dominating the touches and the usage and the production, but Roschon has 4 rushing touchdowns this year. Khalil Herbert completely phased out. Maybe he gets traded before the deadline, but Roschon Johnson, just consider him to be a contingent upside handcuff to DeAndre Swift, and we know he can absorb the receiving role if Swift were to go down. Sean Tucker, I'm not ready to like close the door on Sean Tucker, but Sean Tucker was pretty much phased out this past week. It was a ton of Rachaad White and a ton of Bucky Irving, but we have to keep an eye on what Sean Tucker did in week 6. He scored 33 points, so we don't want to just send him back to the scrap heap, especially with the Bucs having all these injuries at all these different positions and the Bucs losing this game. Maybe they want to mix in Tucker a little bit more this week, but it's not looking as promising. He's clearly the number 3 right there. Kimani Vidal, I'm still very bullish on Kimani Vidal. J.K. Dobbins is playing extremely well, but the Chargers offense is really improving. We saw Ladd McConkey score 2 touchdowns this week. This Chargers offense is sort of trending slightly up, and Vidal is in pretty much elite handcuff territory, not because the Chargers offense is elite, but because of the way they use the running back and Kimani Vidal's two-way skill set. He would pretty much be a like-for-like replacement for J.K. Dobbins, meaning everything they're doing with J.K. Dobbins, they could potentially do with the running back if Dobbins were to miss time. Dobbins playing great, though. If you drafted Dobbins, you're feeling really, really, really good about the value you got with him this year. Kendre Miller, same thing, available in 95% of leagues. He's a stash. He's a handcuffed Alvin Kamara, but it's been promising on a per-touch basis what Kendre Miller's looked like since he came back from starting the year on the injured reserve. Dameon Pierce, available in 95% of leagues. This is a stash. This is a handcuff to, this is a handcuff to Joe Mixon. I almost said Kamara again. I get my old running backs confused. But Dameon Pierce, again, it's like a 0 unless there was an injury. So keep Dameon Pierce. And if you have Joe Mixon, consider rostering Dameon Pierce. I think that's the way you go about it. Houston is very, very reliant on the running back position this year with Joe Mixon. So I think if Joe Mixon were to go down, it would be a little it would be fewer running back touches, but it would still be a healthy enough dose that you'd be happy you had Dameon Pierce. Chris Brooks. This is one where you're saying, Theo, Chris Brooks has sort of taken over the Emmanuel Wilson role. So we talked about how Malik Willis takes over. We talked about how it's going to be very running back centric in Green Bay. Chris Brooks, for the time being, looks like the number 2 over Emmanuel Wilson. And Chris Brooks, we actually talked about last year because Chris Brooks was like this really interesting player, big, strong back with speed. There was like a portion of the Miami fan base that when it was like preseason Chris Brooks, like he had like sort of a hive. Like Chris Brooks was a guy that people were really into for like a short period of time. He's bounced around now. Now he's a Green Bay Packer, but Wilson was a guy that's played well at times. So for Chris Brooks to pass him by is interesting. He's available, of course, in 100% of leagues because he's Chris Brooks, and nobody really probably knew who he was till we started talking about him. There's some really smart people watching this show, so I take that one back, but still an under-the-radar player. But it's probably all for naught because Marshawn Lloyd is going to be back soon, and Marshawn Lloyd's the one you want. He's available in 95% of leagues. This would be the one that if like Josh Jacobs went down, Marshawn Lloyd would be like the guy who could be like a Tyrone Tracy, the guy who steps in and then just balls out. We've seen it with a number of these backup running backs this year. Marshawn Lloyd, 3rd-round pick out of USC, very athletic, two-way skill set. Marshawn Lloyd's the one you want, and he's still IR eligible in a lot of leagues right now. He should be back soon. Jaylen Wright, Miami's offense is back on track, so Jaylen Wright is still worth a stash, but he's sort of like Benson, Miller, Pierce, all these guys. He needs an injury to be viable, but he's with Tua. He has a pathway with injury to Raheem Mostert or an injury to Devon Achane. So Jaylen Wright has 2 contingent upside outcomes, which makes him interesting, even though he's kind of he's a number 3 back for sure, but he's available in 93% of leagues. But you're basically holding a 0 with him at this point. The idea that he was going to earn more after Miami's bye week, it's just not happening. We did see the 85-plus yard game out of him. And then let's talk about potential trade candidates. We mentioned Khalil Herbert. So if you want to pick up Khalil Herbert and hold him for like a week until the trade deadline and see if he somehow lands on a team like Dallas, go ahead and do that. You'll hold him for a week and then let him go, and it's going to cost you 0. Another player where, like kind of galaxy braining this one, Miles Sanders kind of has multiple pathways to relevance now because there's been some rumblings that he's going to get traded, and that would make sense that Sanders gets traded. But then there's also like some speculation and rumblings that Chuba Hubbard could get traded because he's in the final year of his contract. Deontay Johnson sounds like he's going to get traded. So I really think Carolina's willing to trade anybody. Chuba Hubbard has obviously been super productive this year. So Carolina trading him, I'm not sure about that one, but there is some speculation with like Carolina beat reporters that he could be sent out the door if somebody makes an offer that's worthwhile. Miles Sanders, though, I wonder if this week they were showing him off a little bit. He had 7 targets this week, which was pretty high for him. And obviously this is a player that we're not really excited about, but if he lands perfectly, a Dallas type situation, then maybe he'd be a guy that people were excited to pick up off of the waiver wire. You also don't know who's going to get banged up this week. There's injuries we don't even know about. So I think teams are going to be aggressive trying to make trades right now, shore up their depth. Deontay Johnson's going to be a really interesting one. That could have a cascade effect where Deontay could push a couple of wide receiver values down if he lands in potentially the right spot. So running back, not a whole lot of help. This is really more of a contingent upside speculation week for you rather than, hey, I'm going to get this guy, I'm going to plug him right in my lineup. Tight ends. The number 1 tight end target for you on the waiver wire, Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz is available to you in 72% of leagues, and he's been very consistent. He's had 5 targets in 4 straight games. This is one of Jaden Daniels' like preferred targets in this offense. And this past week, Ertz had 7 catches, 77 receiving yards on 11 targets. So he's trending up. Not that exciting, but he's a guy who can help you right now at the tight end position. Tyler Conklin, nothing exciting there. He's a depth tight end or a bye week fill-in option, and not that great of one. He's had 4 targets in back-to-back weeks, but he has scored a touchdown in back-to-back weeks. So not excited about that one. One who's very exciting in a short-term basis is Mike Gesicki. So Mike Gesicki's had 2 big performances this year. And both of those performances have come without T. Higgins. In week 2, Gesicki caught 7 passes for 91 yards. And then on Sunday, he caught 7 for 83 yards. So Higgins has a quad injury. So like for me, Mike Gesicki is a player where he's almost like filling a wide receiver position when Higgins is out. They're not elevating usage for a secondary receiver. Instead, they're elevating usage for Gesicki. So this is one that's interesting. I think Gesicki, if Higgins misses another one, is one that you want to scoop off the waiver wire. And there's not going to be that much enthusiasm for him. I don't think people are really going to pay for the stats, but you don't use him if Higgins is back. You only use him if Higgins misses more time. But that's still an interesting player. That kind of production at the tight end spot is an edge for you. And another tight end sort of trending up is Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith available in 94% of leagues. Smith's target share his total targets have remained steady now with Tua Tagovailoa behind center. So Jonnu has had at least 6 targets in 3 consecutive weeks. The production went down this week, but the targets didn't. He had 6 targets this week despite Tua coming back. So there was a lot of speculation last week that Jonnu would just get boxed out, that Jonnu's recent production was all because they couldn't do anything with the wide receivers. And I think there's some truth to that, but it seems like Jonnu has more of a static role in the offense, where this is a guy that's going to be a potential valuable player for you to have with all these bye weeks coming up. Noah Fant, available in 70% of leagues. Very disappointing this past week. Even with DK sidelined, Noah Fant didn't pick up his production. He's a low-end option, a bye week fill-in at best right now. One deep sleeper tight end that I think is one that's an interesting one, especially for like FFPC tight end premium managers, and that's Brenton Strange of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So this was a second-round pick out of Penn State 2 years back. And this year, he filled in a little bit for Evan Engram earlier in the year. Not enough that he was like ever top 10 worthy for us. But what's interesting is you have all these wide receiver injuries in Jacksonville right now. So Brenton Strange becomes an interesting player if they just move Evan Engram and they stick him in the slot. And I think that could happen, where Evan Engram just plays the slot and he's the primary receiving target for Trevor Lawrence. And Brenton Strange fills in as like the inline tight end. He had 5 catches for 59 yards on Sunday, and he's going to cost you nothing because I don't think anybody's thinking like I am on this Brenton Strange one. So add him and see if his production maintains. And when we're talking about tight end premium leagues, we're talking about people that are in tight end trouble. 5 targets at the tight end position is somewhat usable some weeks here. And if Strange can hold on to that with his skill set and his profile of being a second-round pick, that's an interesting one. Jatavian Sanders, available in 99% of leagues. Big letdown week for him. This was a quarterback change. Bryce Young certainly didn't look Sanders' way. He only drew 1 target, but Sanders had 11 in week 6 and 7 combined. Speculation ad only. So we get through the running backs, the quarterbacks, and the tight ends. The wide receivers do have some interesting players here. And easily the best addition at the wide receiver spot is Cedric Tillman. Cedric Tillman is available to you in 81% of leagues. Tillman is the top waiver wire available this week. Like, he's number 1 in my top 10 overall. I don't think that this is like a bold statement. I think most of you would have guessed that Tillman's my number 1 ad. He caught 2 touchdowns and he had 7 catches for 99 yards this past week. We talked about Jameis Winston sort of unlocking players, but we saw Cedric Tillman actually do this with now 2 quarterbacks, DTR and now Jameis Winston. Both look Cedric Tillman's way. So Tillman is static. He's in the Amari Cooper role. Like, do not discount this one. This is an opportunity for you. Be aggressive with this one, especially this week. If you need a flex, Cedric Tillman's the guy. Cedric Tillman was a day 2 pick last year out of Tennessee. So Southeastern Conference pedigree at wide receiver, day 2 draft capital at wide receiver, and now back-to-back weeks of strong production. This is like a no-brainer ad for you. Cedric Tillman is trending up. And if you added Cedric Tillman for cheap last week, that's great. We did have Cedric Tillman in the top 10 last week. So I think a lot of you probably did add him. And I added him in a bunch of places. And I added him a bunch of places where he wasn't necessarily like the top fab addition easily. Like last week was one where people were really going after Pearsall. People were really going after McMillan where he was available. People were going after Juwan Jennings. So Tillman sort of fell to like wide receiver 4 in a lot of leagues, waiver wire ads, and he's going to end up being one that's really, really static and useful. So go ahead and bid for him if you can. He's available in 81% of leagues. Now, in your league, if Tillman was added, Elijah Moore might not have been added. And Elijah Moore makes our top 10 as well. I don't need to tell you about Elijah Moore. This is one where his rookie year, this guy was worth a first-round pick in Dynasty. This guy was flying up. Year 2 was a big disappointment. Garrett Wilson overtook him, gets traded to Cleveland, but he's easily the less expensive way to get into this Cleveland passing game. Again, like Elijah Moore, this is one of the best situations he's ever been in. If you think about sort of the train wreck that he's been in his career, quarterback-wise, everything in New York and then Deshaun Watson in Cleveland, this is the best quarterback situation he's ever had. And he had 12 targets and he caught 8 passes for 85 yards this past week. Moore makes the top 10. And again, this is a guy we're talking about, had second-round NFL draft capital and was really good as a rookie in New York, had a bunch of like big-time weeks. So Elijah Moore has the pedigree. This could be a fun end of the rest of the season. Tillman and Moore are both usable in the flex spots this week. I prefer Tillman, but Moore is going to cost you less fab this week. Demario Douglas, available to you in 69% of leagues. I could have included him in the shallow leagues, but he's going to be cut in a bunch of leagues, so I figured I'd just talk about him here. This is a player that when Drake Maye is on the field, he targets Demario Douglas. Demario Douglas was banged up that one game with Maye, and then Maye gets knocked out of last week, so I'm not like ready to throw the towel in on Demario Douglas. Demario Douglas had 3 games with 9 or more targets since week 3, and I think like when Drake Maye's fully back, you'll have some useful weeks with Demario Douglas on that offense. Xavier Legette available in 85% of leagues. He caught a touchdown and he was targeted 7 times this past week. His usage could increase over the second half of the year as Carolina looks to develop him and keep him on the field, especially if Deontay Johnson is traded. Legette is not like that inspiring with his play, but I think Carolina really wants to see what they can get out of him. But the contrarian play, if you don't like Xavier Legette and you don't want to spend fab on a Carolina receiver and you want to get somebody for super cheap, Jalen Coker is interesting. 6'3", undrafted free agent out of Holy Cross. We talked about him a couple weeks back. This is one that's interesting because he looks good out there. He's had 68 or more receiving yards in 2 out of the last 4 weeks. And this is a player that caught a touchdown pass this past week against the Broncos. If Deontay Johnson is traded, then Coker and Legette are both going to be on the field a lot. Obviously, Legette has the pedigree, but Coker has had more receiving yard production than Legette has. So this is one to consider adding for super cheap. Michael Wilson, we talk about him all the time. He had 5 catches on 6 targets, and he scored a touchdown in week 8. Arizona offense looked better. Marvin Harrison Jr. coming on, Trey McBride obviously coming on, and Kyler Murray looked the best he's looked in weeks. So this could be a sign of things to come. If Arizona's trending up, Michael Wilson's going to be trending up as sort of their number 3 target in the passing game. Big, strong wide receiver, but this is a kind of guy that's going to help you through the bye weeks. Not an exciting start, but one that has a floor. He's got a use, and we think this offense might be finally getting it together. Josh Palmer trending up a little bit. He's caught 6 passes for 135 yards over the past 2 weeks combined. This is a player where a lot of people were like, Josh Palmer could lead them in production this year. Josh Palmer was the guy that we were drafting this year. And obviously Ladd McConkey's the guy in LA, but Palmer is sort of trending up a little bit. He's got a lot of history with Justin Herbert. Not a very exciting addition, but you know it's right there. Another player who's sort of not very exciting that I was disappointed in the production coming out of the bye week was Jalen Tolbert. Jalen Tolbert's available to you in 79% of leagues. Another low-scoring performance. CeeDee Lamb dominated the targets at 17. Tolbert is a depth piece only. He could also be on shaky ground when Brandon Cooks comes back. Disappointed in that one. I had him in the top 10 last week, so I was a little too enthusiastic. I'll take the L on that one, but Tolbert is a full-time guy. He's going to be on the field a lot. Maybe he can get this thing going, but I'm way less optimistic than I was last week. Demarcus Robinson, available to you in 91% of leagues. We got to talk about him because he caught 2 touchdown passes last week. Worth mentioning there, if LA's offense really takes off, then he could be a dart throw, touchdown dependent flex play when your team's in big time problems during the bye weeks. One thing that's interesting is I didn't even mention Colby Parkinson because his usage was sort of phased out, and Demarcus Robinson caught those touchdowns even with Puka and Cooper there. So I'm not against rostering Robinson, but he is touchdown dependent. So temper your expectations. Sterling Shepard, if you're in a complete bind this week and you need a dart throw, Sterling Shepard was targeted 5 times on Sunday. He caught 3 of them, minimal yardage, but he is going to get targets. So he's very much a floor play. Jalen McMillan led them in snaps at the wide receiver spot. Shepard was number 2. So he will be on the field a lot. Troy Franklin, I'm not ready to give up on him, but a very disappointing week for him. Simply a speculation ad to see if he takes off in the second half of the season. Probably not going to. He's available in 96% of leagues. He had a strong week 7, a decent week 6, disappointing in week 8. So we'll keep an eye on him. One player who makes the top 10 this week that's very much a lesser known player, Parker Washington. Christian Kirk is done for the season. Brian Thomas is banged up. Gabe Davis is banged up. So Jacksonville at one time had a number of wide receivers. Now it's paper thin. So Washington is going to step in and see a prominent role. Makes my top 10 this week after never making the even guys to watch list at any point in the season. Second-year player out of Penn State, was a day 3 pick, but there was a lot of people during the draft process who thought he could have been a day 2 pick. So he slipped in the draft for whatever reason. Jacksonville picked him up. This is a solid player with good pedigree coming out of Penn State. He caught 4 passes for 46 yards, and he played 70% of the snaps this past week. So I like Parker Washington. There's a chance that Parker Washington moves way up our waiver wire rankings heading into next week. So he makes the top 10 this week. And I think this is one where you slide in, you add him, and see what happens. And if you're in a real bind, like what we saw last week, I think that's the floor. I think he will have more than 4 catches this week, and I think he'll be on the field more than 70% of the time. So we'll see what happens there. Kalif Raymond, trending up. He scored 2 touchdowns on Sunday. One was a punt return. One was on a reception. He also scored a touchdown in week 7. Dan Campbell talked glowingly about Kalif Raymond. So Kalif Raymond, if you need a desperation play and you're chasing an offense, there is not a better offense to chase right now than the Lions. They're an absolute machine. I don't expect much from Kalif Raymond, but scoring back-to-back touchdowns and the punt return, this is a guy that the coaching staff loves. It's not out of the question he scores for a 3rd game in a row. Kayshon Boutte. So here you go, Devy guys. There's some Devy people out there watching that are like, I've had this guy on my roster for 6 years. This is a player that fell in the draft. At one point, he was considered to be an elite prospect out of LSU. New England drafts him. Hasn't really been a whole lot, but he's led New England wide receivers in snaps now for 3 consecutive games. He's a deep league option for you this week. And he had a career high 6 targets this past week, caught 3 of them for 46 yards, played 80% of the snaps. So Boutte is right there. John Metchie, available in 99% of leagues. Metchie could see more work in Houston's depleted receiving room. He caught 3 passes on 4 targets this past week. And anybody who doesn't know the story with John Metchie, it's a very inspirational one, was a 2nd-round pick out of Alabama, highly productive player at Alabama, ends up getting sick, gets through it. Metchie was one that was an inspirational one. We don't need to dive into his whole story, but it's worth reading about where Metchie was able to overcome health problems, come back to the team. They get rid of Noah Brown because they're sort of into John Metchie, and John Metchie might actually have his opportunity right now. That would be a real story if Metchie can be a productive player this year for the Texans. There'll be a ton of people rooting for him. Xavier Hutchinson, available in 85% of leagues. He'll also get an opportunity. I don't want to get as hyped about Hutchinson as I am Metchie, but Hutchinson did have a catch this past week. We thought that his opportunity was there when Nico Collins went down. He hasn't done anything, but now with Diggs and Collins out, guys like Metchie and Hutchinson are viable. Okay, so again, not that exciting a week. Let's be honest about that. We don't want to overhype guys just because they happen to be waiver wire ads. This is a strong week if you need a quarterback. This is a strong week if you need a few wide receivers. But if you add a running back, understand that these running backs are contingent upside guys, not ones going in your roster. in your lineup, but there's still guys that could provide you immense value with an injury. So let's go through our top 10 overall. Cedric Tillman is my number one ad. He's one that I want you to be aggressive with this week and add him. He's got the pedigree. He's got the opportunity. He's got the size. This is something that could be static. He could be a high-end wide receiver 3 for the rest of the season. Bo Nix, my number 2 overall. He is trending up. This is a player with rushing upside who just passed for 3 touchdowns. Quarterback 3 over the last 4 games overall. That's crazy for Bo Nix. Isaac Guerendo, number 3. We talked about Guerendo, all the reasons to add him. Drake Maye at number 4. When he comes back, he still gives you upside at the quarterback position. Elijah Moore at number 5. This is a player where I'm excited about Elijah Moore and what he can do in this Jameis Winston-led offense. Number 6, Jameis Winston himself. Go ahead and add him. So we have 3 quarterbacks in our top 6. Not really a good thing when that happens because it means there's a lack of running backs and wide receivers. Blake Corum at 7. Huge upside if Kyron Williams were to miss time. Zach Ertz at number 8. Zach Ertz goes right in your lineup as a low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2 if you need the help. Parker Washington at number 9. Big-time opportunity for the second-year wide receiver. And then at 10, it's a tie. Mike Gesicki with Kimani Vidal with Michael Wilson. 1, 2, 3, depending on your needs. So the top 10, once again, Cedric Tillman at 1, Bo Nix at 2, Isaac Guerendo at 3, Drake Maye at 4, Elijah Moore at 5, Blake Corum at 6, Jameis Winston at 7, Zach Ertz at 8, Parker Washington at 9, Mike Gesicki at 10, Kimani Vidal tied with Mike Gesicki and Michael Wilson at 10. I'm Theo Gremminger. We're going to be back here every single week giving you all the waiver wire advice you need to crush your league this season. Stick with us right here, Player Profiler. I'm dropping Dynasty Life. I'm dropping press coverage pretty much every week, sometimes every other week. And then my sleeper show drops here on Fridays or Saturday. If you like this waiver wire style show, you're going to love my sleeper show. We're going to see you soon. Let's crush our leagues. Make sure you're staying a week ahead on all those bye weeks.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.